Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 waiver wire targets for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about all the waiver wire pickups and breakout players from Week 10 of the 2020 fantasy football season as we look to potentially pick up said players and help our lineups as the weeks progress. Of course, we're going to be talking about running backs, wide receivers, tight end, quarterbacks, and defenses that you could potentially stream this upcoming week. We'll talk about these players. I'll give you guys my thought process, the breakdown of their stats from this past week and how they performed and how they could potentially help you in the coming weeks based on their upcoming schedules, and of course, how they've been consistently getting more and more opportunity as the weeks have progressed. Now, before we begin today's video, I want to thank you guys for your incredible support, helping us surpass 34,000 subscribers. I didn't believe that we could get to this point prior to the season starting. Honestly, I just thought, yeah, you know what, it's 2020. Let's just see what happens. But my goodness, you guys have been absolutely incredible. I can't thank you guys enough for your incredible support. Again, we're going to be making content every single day here via 2020 fantasy football. So again, for those of you who are interested, trying to stay up to date on my latest content, click that subscribe button. If you'd like, down in the description of the video, we have timestamps if you're looking for a specific player. While you're down there, you could also find the link to our Discord server. Click the like button, comment down below because it helps us out a lot here on the channel. It really does help support. All right, thank you very much. And let's get into this, shall we? Let's start talking about some Week 11 running back targets. As you can see on screen, we're going to have 6 players, but we'll have a 7th, and it'll just be like a contingency plan. But either way, as of right now, the number 1 running back pickup, in my opinion, and he's been a guy that I've been talking about for multiple weeks now, it's Wayne Gallman. Hopefully he's picked up in majority of your leagues. If he is not, then you absolutely need to go get him because I think he's only owned in about 50% of leagues right now on Yahoo. That being said, he's had 4 consecutive weeks of scoring a rushing touchdown. That in itself is an incredible value pickup because, again, you're not only getting the starting running back of the New York Giants right now, but you're getting a guy that has high upside based on the ability to score touchdowns and the fact that this team wants to continue to give him carries. Just this past Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles, a matchup a lot of people were kind of worried about. I knew that he'd play well because he played well against them a couple weeks back. I think it was week 7 in which he came in for an injured Devontae Freeman. Now that Devontae Freeman was placed on the injured reserve, of course, Wayne Gallman was going to get more work. Hit 18 rushing attempts, 53 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. So again, that is 5 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks for him. They go on a bye week this week, but that being said, I think once they come back, their schedule is favorable enough to where Wayne Gallman can continue to be the starting running back of this team. I mean, when I watch Wayne Gallman score as many points as he does on a weekly basis, I think to myself, my goodness, Saquon Barkley would have been amazing this year. It's just unfortunate, but we'll see Saquon next year regardless. All right, so either way, Wayne Gallman's our number 1 RB pickup for this week. The number 2 is Damien Harris. Now, for those of you who sat down and watched some Sunday Night Football last night, of course, that game had some incredibly inconsistent weather. The rain would come, it would go, but running the ball was the most consistent factor of that game because both those teams wanted to impose their will via the ground game of their offensive lines. Now, of course, Damien Harris has been the starting running back of this team since Sony Michel has gone down. I know Sony Michel is on the injured reserve eligible to return list as of right now, but even if he returns, Damien Harris has been getting a huge workload and consistently getting more and more touches as the weeks have progressed. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, 10 carries, 16 carries, 14 carries, and just this past Sunday, 22 total rushing attempts for 121 rushing yards. Sure, he did not accompany that with a touchdown as Cam Newton is the touchdown vulture of that team. But that being said, I'm still comfortable with Damien Harris as a consistent back. This upcoming week, they take on the Houston Texans. Again, we've mentioned it before. They give up the most rushing yards to opposing offenses this season per game on average. Nick Chubb just had an incredible game, along with Kareem Hunt still getting a consistent amount of touches. Those guys impose their will. I think Damien Harris will easily be able to do so. Now, besides Damien Harris, of course, there's another New England running back that I have to mention. There's a guy that had an incredible game last night, and he kind of is looking like the next James White of this offense, and that's how he's being used. I wanted to mention Rex Burkhead in the same capacity of Damien Harris because I do think that this combination of the two are going to continue to succeed. I mean, Damien Harris sure is getting all the carries, but the way that Rex Burkhead is being used as a back that could be either on third down or even in the early downs, he's been just producing out of his mind as of the last couple of weeks. And I know there's a little bit of touchdown inconsistency here and there, but to be honest, for those of you who are struggling, I just wanted to mention Rex Burkhead because last night he was averaging 5 yards per carry, 6 rushes for 31 yards, 5 total targets leading to 4 receptions, 35 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns, 1 caught from the wide receiver Jakobi Meyers. So again, They have a great matchup. He will be utilized. And I think as we progress, Rex Burkhead's not a bad option. So I just wanted to mention it there. And now we can go ahead and put Damien Harris back on the screen. And we'll move on to our number 3 running back for this week. We have J.D. McKissic, the running back of the Washington football team. Now, of course, we know Antonio Gibson had a 20-point week. And that is not to be mistaken. Of course, Antonio Gibson is still going to be the starting running back of that team, scoring 2 rushing touchdowns. That's beautiful. But this team is feeding the ball to their backs purely because of Alex Smith's association in this offense. Now, obviously, Alex Smith has been dealing with his own, situation. He's going to be the comeback player of the year. I know Ben Roethlisberger's playing out of his mind. I know Newton has played a lot better than people, kind of gave him credit for. But Alex Smith truly does deserve to be the comeback player of the year after coming back from that horrific injury and really producing as well as he has. I know he kept his team in the game. Unfortunately, they lost because of a late penalty, but his usage of running backs in that offense is unbelievable. In the last 2 weeks, J.D. McKissic has 29 total targets. No other player in the National Football League is at that number. I'm not even close. So, to be honest, the usage of J.D. McKissic is promising, especially in a PPR format. Yesterday, 15 total targets, 7 receptions, 43 yards. A couple of them he could have caught. A couple of them on the sideline, bounced off his hands, didn't get his feet in, a little bit overthrown, underthrown. They'll get more and more consistency as the season continues. And to be honest, nobody's really coming to take Alex Smith's job. Dwayne Haskins lost his opportunity. Kyle Allen's gotten injured. And it just seems like Alex Smith is the go-to rest of season for this team. So J.D. McKissic's value continues to increase. He also had a rushing touchdown, which really helped put over his week in that next level for those of you in a half PPR. But either way, needs to be picked up. Nyheim Hines is my number 4. And in comparison to the running backs that I've prior mentioned, Nyheim Hines gets the most limited amount of work, but is also super inconsistent. Now, I know he's scored touchdowns in 2 out of the last 3 weeks, and that's kind of giving us more and more of a potential of thinking maybe he's going to continue to stay on this track. And to be honest, I kind of subscribe to that thought process to an extent. Jonathan Taylor, JT, does not want to win this job. They're giving him in every single opportunity early in games to win the job and to establish himself, but he's not getting the job done. Nyheim Hines on Thursday night came in 12 carries, 70 yards, had a rushing touchdown, 5 receptions on 6 targets, 45 receiving yards, and a touchdown, and was totally the entire offense of the Indianapolis Colts. I think, again, as long as this backfield is going to be a 3-headed monster, it's going to be difficult because one of those touchdowns could go to Jordan Wilkins because, again, he had a lot of goal line opportunities there and he would continue to get stuffed. One of those touchdowns could go in his direction and it could obviously hurt the value of Nyheim Hines. But when he's putting up 26-plus points, has 3 games this season alone of 2-plus touchdowns, that in itself leads me to think that they're going to utilize more and more Nyheim Hines. Playing against the Green Bay Packers this week, I think, again, the Green Bay Packers, they give up a lot of points to opposing running backs. The Indianapolis Colts want to run the ball and consistently give the ball to their running backs. So, again, if Nyheim Hines is going to continue to stay on top of the rotation, of course, he's going to be of value. So, we're going to go ahead and name him as our number 4. Moving on to number 5, we have Salvon Ahmed. Now, this is a running back that honestly came out of nowhere to an extent. Now, last week, in week 9, we saw him get a little bit of work in the rotation of running backs that the Miami Dolphins were functioning with. We saw some work out of Jordan Howard, of course, and then we saw little catches here and there from Ahmed, and he was, playing majority of the snaps here and there in week 9. But we thought, hey, you know what? Maybe they're just going to continue to stay with Jordan Howard until we see, of course, Myles Gaskin return. This week, they flipped the script. Ahmed won the job. They cut Jordan Howard earlier this morning, and after his performance last night, I don't blame them. I mean, I think they paid Jordan Howard almost $10 million this year to come in and barely run for 1 yard per carry, maybe less. Either way, Ahmed had 21 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown, 1 catch out of the backfield for 1 target, 15.5 fantasy points. This upcoming week plays against the Denver Broncos. For those of us who have paid attention over the last couple of weeks, the Denver Broncos defense is nothing like they used to be before, especially early in the season. They're giving up 100-yard rushers and a lot of points to opposing running backs on a very consistent basis as of the weeks have progressed. Starting off this season, of course, Derrick Henry, James Conner took advantage of that defense, but just this past week, Josh Jacobs and Devontae Booker just both torched that defense. A couple of weeks prior, the Chargers torched them. So again, we have a very good chance of Ahmed having a pretty good week here until, of course, Myles Gaskin returns. And even then, even when Myles Gaskin returns, we might end up seeing a little bit of a rotation in this backfield. The last running back I wanted to mention, former Dolphin himself, had a pretty good revenge game against the Dolphins. Kallen Ballage seems to be the starter of this team. I mean, that's what it seems like. 18 carries, 5 receptions, 34 yards on the through the air, 68 on the ground. Touching the ball 23 times. Until Eckler returns, it seems to be his job. Obviously, I'll die on the hill of Tremaine Pope obviously killed many of you, and I apologize for that. I thought he was going to legitimately play. He was cleared from concussion protocol, and they had moved Kallen Ballage back to the practice squad. I thought, you know what? They're going to let him go back down. But hey, you know what? Kallen Ballage plays against the New York Jets this week. That's another revenge matchup against Adam Gase. So why not? So again, he is the number 6 option, and in my opinion, a pretty good play. All right, now that we've gone ahead and covered that, we can move on to the wide receiver position as we talk about our Week 11 wide receiver targets. Starting off with my number 1, it is Michael Pittman Jr., the rookie wide receiver. Now, of course, on Thursday Night Football, he had himself a pretty good game. 8 total targets, 7 receptions, 101 receiving yards, and 21 rushing yards. This is the first wide receiver on the Indianapolis Colts this season to surpass 100 receiving yards, had 15.7 fantasy points, plays against the Green Bay Packers this upcoming week. If in fact they're going to be missing Jair Alexander, Kevin King, they're going to be missing their top 2 cornerbacks potentially, and that is going to lead to the potential success of wide receivers on the Colts, but specifically Pittman Jr. because again, even since coming back from the injured reserve, he seems to be the number 1. T.Y. Hilton coming back hasn't shown much. Zach Pascal, Marcus Johnson. There really isn't a receiver that has kind of stepped up and really proven themselves. Michael Pittman Jr. did so on Thursday night and potentially could see more of a workload and more of a little bit of an eye from Phillip Rivers as he potentially becomes his favorite target as we proceed. Besides the fact that he plays against Green Bay this week, I know it might not be the best matchup, but in the coming weeks, they get to play the Houston Texans twice in 3 weeks. And in my opinion, that is a incredible matchup. And if in fact Michael Pittman Jr. could be in your rotation potentially as a flex option wide receiver 3, it could be a good pickup and play. So we move on to the next wide receiver. We talk about Jakobi Meyers, a guy that we've talked about for the last 3 weeks. Of course, since week 9, he's been on the board because he's had some pretty good performances and gotten more and more work. Now, the question is, what he did last night, is it sustainable? I think so. 7 targets, 5 receptions, 59 yards in a game in which it rained horribly. But the biggest thing that took him over, that got him to the 15-point fantasy mark in a half PPR scoring format, was his passing touchdown of 20-plus yards. Now, of course, I was surprised to hear it as well. The announcer's booth was talking about he used to be a college quarterback. That's insane. Of course, similar to like a Julian Edelman, they go find another wide receiver that used to be a quarterback and, slings the rock. Either way, they designed a pretty good play. They got Rex Burkhead another receiving touchdown. This upcoming week, they take on the Houston Texans. I think that is a favorable matchup, just like I talked about with Michael Pittman Jr. in the coming weeks. I think anybody can really run the ball and or pass the ball on that defense on a consistent basis. And of course, as long as Jakobi Meyers is their number 1 wide receiver, considering, Damiere Byrd hasn't been able to do anything. And of course, N'Keal Harry hasn't been able to do anything. It just seems to me like Jakobi Meyers, an automatic pickup and play, of course. KJ Hamler is our next option. The rookie wide receiver out of the Denver Broncos organization has had back-to-back weeks of 10 targets. That in itself is a pretty good sign. Now, I know in comparison to the other wide receivers on this team, Deshaun Hamilton's getting a couple touchdowns here and there. Tim Patrick every now and then. Jerry Jeudy should have been able to produce at a higher level, but of course didn't. But the fact that KJ Hamler is getting as much work as he has this season just makes me believe that the team is becoming more and more confident of his ability. And of course, Drew Lock is becoming more confident in throwing him the ball and getting him more targets. Of course, he only caught 4 out of his 10 targets for 50 yards. But if you can go ahead and build more of a chemistry and find himself in more and more advantageous matchups, of course, we could see KJ Hamler being a productive, fantasy potential option as the weeks progress here. We have Josh Reynolds as our number 4 option. Now, Josh Reynolds was the number 1 wide receiver of that entire game between the Seattle Seahawks and the Los Angeles Rams. He scored more points than DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Cooper Kupp, and Robert Woods in a matchup that I thought, and many of us thought, should have been 100% favored in the direction of the wide receiver position and a back-and-forth shootout. I mean, Jared Goff came in that game and was consistent in the passing game, but never got a passing touchdown. I had 3 of them vultured on the ground by 2 from Malcolm Brown, 1 from Darrell Henderson. It just seems to me like, of course, Josh Reynolds is getting more and more targets as the weeks have progressed, like we talked about on the Hidden Gems episode. I think he had 17 in the 2 prior weeks, had 10 this week for a total of 8 total receptions, 94 receiving yards. It just seems to me like he's getting more and more opportunities in this offense, and as that continues to progress, I think we can continue to trust him in an offense that just doesn't want to throw the ball anywhere else. When the opposing defenses are keyed in on covering Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, Josh Reynolds continues to find himself open. Willie Snead is our number 5 option, and because of last night's Sunday Night Football game, between the Baltimore Ravens and New England Patriots. I knew the coverage of the New England Patriots was going to be difficult. The weather definitely played a part, but if Willie Snead can honestly be the number one wide receiver of this Ravens offense, I really do think that there is a very good schedule to be had from weeks 13 through 16. Now, the question is going to be, can Willie Snead get there? I mean, he has shown a couple spurts of energy in the last couple of weeks, playing against Pittsburgh, scoring a touchdown, of course, playing against New England this past Sunday and scoring 2 touchdowns. But of course, we need to see more and more activeness from Lamar Jackson trying to get the ball to his receivers. Marquise Brown has been an absolute dud this season and has fallen off he's not even on the team at this point. He's a complete ghost in that offense. So it seems to me that if you want the number one wide receiver of the Ravens offense, it's going to be Willie Snead. Of course, as a receiving option in comparison to Mark Andrews in the long run, I don't think he's going to take over in terms of total receptions. But as of right now, it seems to me that Willie Snead's getting more and more opportunity and being relied upon more, and seems to be an option that you can go ahead and potentially pick up. Jakeem Grant, the number 2 wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins. Since Preston Williams went to the injured reserve, we assume that there would be somebody else to step up besides Devontae Parker. Now, Jakeem Grant is known for being a speedster, punt returner, had a punt return the week prior, and just this past week had himself a receiving touchdown, 5 total targets, 4 receptions, 43 yards, 12.3 fantasy points. So he's been consistently scoring points. So again, especially if you play in a league that you can get return yards and points for return yards in a punt or kickoff return scenario, I think Jakeem Grant has himself extra opportunities that a lot of other wide receivers might not be able to get on a consistent basis and find himself with some extra points. But either way, I think Jakeem Grant has himself more and more opportunity as they have better matchups in the coming weeks. The Miami Dolphins 3-0 with Tua. They could be on a pace of, continuously scoring 20 to 30 points per game. And of course, if you're going to do that, it's going to require more and more wide receiver help. Jakeem Grant is definitely going to be involved in that. Moving on to number 7, Jalen Reagor, the rookie wide receiver, honestly had himself a decent game. 7 total targets, which is pretty good in terms of opportunity. 4 receptions, 47 yards. In comparison to the other wide receivers on the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I know the Philadelphia Eagles are a big question mark. The division is practically being handed to them, and they don't want to win it. It's a little bit of a Jonathan Taylor situation in Indianapolis. The job's being handed to you. Do the job now. Eagles, the division is literally yours. Take it, but they don't want to take it. Travis Fulgham disappeared. Alshon Jeffrey didn't catch a pass. Dallas Goedert is irrelevant in comparison to Richard Rodgers. Miles Sanders got outproduced by Boston Scott. That offense is completely backwards. But I think if Jalen Reagor continues to produce and get the opportunities that he's had, he could easily be the number 2 wide receiver of this team, maybe even the number 1 in the coming weeks. We just have to see what kind of touchdown upside he has. But as of right now, they take on the Cleveland Browns this upcoming week. I still think he's a potential stash for the upcoming schedule of the season. So that's why we mentioned him. Allen Lazard is our number 8 for this upcoming week. And the only thing I want to mention with Allen Lazard is, of course, the production of Marquez Valdes-Scantling in the last 2 weeks. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, MVS, has been unbelievable, which makes me think that if, in fact, Allen Lazard comes back and takes back the number 2 receiving spot, then that work could easily go in his direction. In the last 2 weeks, MVS has had 10 total targets, 6 receptions, 202 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns for a total of 41.2 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format in just the past 2 weeks. So again, there is a lot of opportunity as being the number 2 wide receiver of a Packers-led offense and Aaron Rodgers-led offense. So again, there is a very good chance that if, in fact, Allen Lazard comes back, wins the number 2 job, is healthy and ready to go, in the coming weeks, as the season progresses, obviously this upcoming week they take on Indianapolis. I'm not as keen in starting him there, but I still think in the coming weeks we could see Allen Lazard be of service. The last player that I wanted to mention is Cole Beasley. I know he goes on a bye week this week with the Buffalo Bills, but Cole Beasley's had a couple big games and a couple dud games, and I'll just mention the stats right now. In 2 out of the last 4 weeks, specifically week 9 and 8, he had 5 total targets. Okay. That's not good. In 2 weeks, getting 5 targets, not great. But in weeks 7 and 10, he had 25 total targets combined. 13 just this past week for 11 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. Cole Beasley is very inconsistent. In comparison to the field, in terms of John Brown and Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley's a coin toss on whether or not he's going to produce. And when he does, he has incredibly pop-off games. The question is going to be, can we rely upon him? He's only owned in 50% of leagues. You don't really have to rely upon him until you really do have to, and you can just slot him in there and maybe get a big game out of him. That's all I wanted to mention with Cole Beasley. We can go ahead and move on to the tight end position now, starting off with our Number 1 tight end this week, it's Logan Thomas. So here's the thing. In comparison to the other tight ends in this landscape, the tight end position is pretty volatile. We know that. Touchdowns are more important than anything. But as of right now, in terms of targets and receptions, Logan Thomas has been able to get there, especially because of the fact that Alex Smith's on the team. Alex Smith, we know, helped Travis Kelce become a consistent number 1 tight end and, continue this reign of being the number 1 overall tight end. But now that he's with the Washington football team, Logan Thomas has a lot of opportunity. He has 6 total targets, 4 receptions, 66 receiving yards. Now, the reason I wanted to mention him this week specifically is because they play against the Cincinnati Bengals, giving up the second most points to opposing tight ends this season. That kind of a matchup, in my opinion, could be favorable, and that is a reason why I can go ahead and potentially pick up and stream Logan Thomas if, in fact, we're going to be missing some potential talent this week. Now, I also wanted to mention Austin Hooper to the extent that I know Austin Hooper is playing at home this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. The weather might be horrible. If that's the case, I don't want to play him. But in the coming weeks, I think Cleveland's schedule gets really favorable, especially in the fantasy playoffs. I know that in week 14, they play against Baltimore, but in weeks 15 and 16, the semis and the finals, Austin Hooper gets to play against the Giants and the Jets. Those 2 matchups, extremely favorable in my eyes, and I think if Austin Hooper is going to be the starting receiving tight end on that team, getting continuous targets could be a value. Of course, this past week wasn't great because of the weather. Eric Ebron's our number 3 option. I think Eric Ebron getting 6 targets is a good option there, and at least has shown that he wants, or the team wants to get him the ball. But with 3 other dynamic wide receivers, Juju, Deontay Johnson, Claypool, all scoring touchdowns and getting upwards of 9 to 10 targets a week, it just seems like he doesn't have much of a role in this offense as we may have perceived. As we continue, it just seems like this offense is just slinging the rock. Maybe it goes in his direction. They do play against the Jacksonville Jaguars, giving up a lot of points to opposing tight ends. There's a very decent chance that Eric Ebron could produce, but we go ahead and just leave it at that. Dalton Schultz as our number 4, not a bad option. The last time we saw him had 8 targets and 7 targets, specifically the most recent time against Pittsburgh. 7 targets, 4 receptions, 48 yards with Gilbert at quarterback. Plays against the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming week. Again, Minnesota's given up a lot of points. We'll see that later tonight as we watch Jimmy Grant produce against them. Of course, this video is being recorded prior to the Monday Night Football game between the Bears and Vikings, so I'm not sure of the results there. That being said, I think Dalton Schultz continue to be relied upon in that offense and continue to be used. Seems to be a pretty good streaming option. Speaking of the Bears versus Vikings game, again, I don't know how Jimmy Graham's going to produce, but the fact that he's only owned in about 50% of leagues makes me think that's a little bit under-owned or underutilized. I know he's going to go on a bye week, but the rest of season schedule for the Chicago Bears is such a favorable slate of games that regardless of who's going to be the starting quarterback or who's going to be in the matchup or who's going to be healthy, it doesn't matter. As long as Jimmy Graham's there, he is going to produce just based off the schedule. So again, another guy that you could potentially pick up for the end of the season. The last name I wanted to mention, Jordan Reed, also going on bye week. But again, the question remains, what kind of value does he have? I think he's got pretty decent value. In a pretty good matchup, he produced 5 catches, 62 yards, 8.7 fantasy points. I know they're going to bye, but again, the San Francisco 49ers, Nick Mullins specifically, wants to use the tight end position at a premium. He's going to continue to get the ball in Jordan Reed's direction. And I think, of course, that'll lead to success. I think these are some pretty good tight end options. But again, the tight end field is really thin. Again, we want touchdown upside. If we don't get it, we want to at least have the opportunity that leads to yards and receptions in our leagues. We move on to the quarterback position, and we have a couple names that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, but specifically our number 1 is Tua. Here's the thing. The Miami Dolphins are on a 3-game winning streak. Tua has had back-to-back games of 2 passing touchdowns. In one of those games, 34 rushing yards. He's getting more and more comfortable in this offense. In this upcoming week, they take on the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos have given up a lot of points to opposing offensive as of late. The Raiders just dropped almost a 40 bomb on them. Of course, the week prior, the Los Angeles Chargers really got after them, putting up 30 points. Teams are scoring against that defense regardless of whether their secondary is healthy or not. I think Tua, as long as he's getting more and more comfort in this offense, he'll be able to produce against Denver. If anything, if it's more of a competitive game and it's a shootout, even better. But to be honest, I think Tua, this offense, just seems to be on the right track and a guy that you may be able to, potentially rely upon in the coming weeks with these incredible matchups coming down the line. We have Matthew Stafford as our number 2, and I know Matthew Stafford's dealing with a bit of a thumb injury. From what they've said, the MRI, the X-rays, all that, it's not going to impede him. People thought that there was going to be a potential of him missing time. That's not going to be the case. I think Matthew Stafford's going to play, and he's going to be fine. Just this past week, playing against the Washington football team secondary, again, that was one of the best defenses in terms of stopping the opposing wide receiver position. That being said, Matthew Stafford came in and was on fire. 24 for 33 passing, 276 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. That's without Kenny Golladay in the offense. So again, they flipped the script a little bit there and put up a huge number with Marvin Hall, and of course, Marvin Jones. TJ Hawkinson disappeared, unfortunately, but at least we saw the breakout, another breakout performance from DeAndre Swift. Very excited about his potential future. But either way, Matthew Stafford, a great option. Cam Newton's our number 3. Playing against the Houston Texans, again, that's a defense that gives up a lot of points on the ground, and that's what Cam Newton specializes in, running the ball. He's had a rushing touchdown almost every single game of his season this year in which he's been active. Had a pretty good passing game in a pretty terrible weather scenario. 13 for 17 passing, 118 passing yards, had a passing touchdown. Of course, he's going to get more and more usage and get himself some points. Just this past night, I mean, again, he had 5 points in terms of passing yards, had himself a 4-point per passing touchdown. That's 9 points, accompanied by 8 points on the ground itself. You get yourself a 17-point player with potential upside if, in fact, the weather is not as bad. I think, again, Cam Newton, not a bad option this upcoming week. Now, the next option may be a little bit confusing, but for those of you who watched the New Orleans Saints game, at halftime, Drew Brees, Sean Payton talked on the sideline, and Drew Brees did not start in the second half. Jameis Winston came out. Now, I'm hearing information, I mean, obviously at the current time of recording this video, I'm not 100% certain of what the situation with Drew Brees is. I'm hearing that he's hurt. He could miss some time. That's the quote. I don't know if he's going to miss multiple weeks or if it's just going to be 1 week, but I think Jameis Winston this upcoming week as a streaming option against the Atlanta Falcons, not a bad pickup in play. Again, he's played the Atlanta Falcons multiple times in his career when playing with Tampa Bay, so he's very comfortable against that defense. He just needs to get a little bit more of a chemistry with Michael Thomas, and the sky's the limit. Again, he was overthrowing Michael Thomas a couple times yesterday, could have had multiple touchdowns in his direction, but again, if he gets a full week of practice as a starting quarterback, I think we could see Jameis Winston definitely be able to produce and find himself potentially as a starting quarterback of this team in the future. Drew Lock's our number 5. I know he threw 4 interceptions yesterday, but I think, again, we've seen him have a lot of garbage time points in the fourth quarter. He didn't really get the opportunity to do that because the Raiders just ran the ball the whole time, and it really forced him to kind of have to just force passes into coverage, make rookie decisions, because he truly is at this point still a little bit of a rookie considering how many games he started and played in his career. But either way, I do think that the Miami matchup is a tougher one, but you could see Drew Lock having himself a pretty good game here. 2+ touchdowns is not out of the realm of possibility in my eyes with a high yardage count. The last option for this week at the quarterback position, Kirk Cousins. I know he hasn't produced and played against the Chicago Bears, but they play against Dallas. That is a very favorable matchup. My only concern and why he's the number 6 in comparison to being the number 3 or 2 is because Dalvin Cook could easily have 4 touchdowns against Dallas, and Kirk Cousins maybe throws only 1 touchdown for 100 yards and 10 completions. Therein lies the volatility based on how functional that running game is. So again, Kirk Cousins is a little bit less viable because of the potential of Dalvin Cook taking over. Now, the final section on today's video, we'll talk about Week 11 defensive waiver wire targets, and in terms of players teams, that you can go ahead and stream defensively this week. I think the number 1 defense to stream, of course, is going to be the Miami Dolphins against Drew Lock. Again, if he's coming off of throwing 6 interceptions in the last 3 weeks, that's going to lead to success. The Miami Dolphins are just making plays, blocking punts, scooping scores, pick sixes, doesn't matter. They are doing everything they possibly can to succeed, and of course, pressuring the quarterback. The Miami Dolphins, in comparison to a lot of teams, loves to run 0 blitzes. They play man coverage in the back because they believe in Xavier Howard and Byron Jones playing man coverage, and they send the house and they get after the quarterbacks. Of course, against Denver could be a very successful strategy. The New Orleans Saints this upcoming week is the next best defense that I wanted to mention. Of course, I think the Saints playing against the Atlanta Falcons could be a defense in which they could produce. I've seen multiple times, especially last season, in which those games were very competitive back and forth, but then again, low scoring because both those teams know each other very well. It could be one of those games in which the defense definitely gets after Matt Ryan, sends a lot of pressure after him, and when you can put pressure on Matt Ryan, it definitely will force him to make mistakes, and in that, could find him some opportunity there. I think the New Orleans Saints coming off a huge week against the 49ers could be a big play here. The Cleveland Browns playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, this is going to be a weather game in Cleveland most likely this week. If that's the case, this is going to be run the ball and just try to keep the ball away from the other team. The way that the Philadelphia Eagles played just this past Sunday just makes me think that if they get into a weather game scenario, they're not going to be able to find a way to succeed. They will fall apart because Cleveland is more comfortable in the conditions, and they are a better running team and a better run-stopping team. So as of right now, I'm thinking the Cleveland Browns, pretty good option. The Minnesota Vikings, of course, will play against the Dallas Cowboys. Gilbert at the quarterback position looked good against Pittsburgh, but that might be a little bit of false confidence. I think Minnesota's defense will be ready for that opposing offense. I know Minnesota's giving up a lot of points to wide receivers, to running backs, but I still think that the Dallas Cowboys offense, unless this bye week has changed them, is very dysfunctional and could be their ultimate demise. Last couple options here. The Los Angeles Chargers playing against the Jets. I know the Chargers defense sucks, especially without Joey Bosa. Hopefully he'll come back from the concussion. But the question remains, what can Joe Flacco do against the Chargers? That's pretty much the matchup. I don't think Joe Flacco will be able to produce. They are going to have to push him to the limit. I think they'll be able to do so and potentially find some value there. The last option, the Atlanta Falcons. Like I mentioned before, the Saints versus Falcons game could be a lower scoring one. I've seen Matt Ryan fall apart. I've seen Jameis Winston fall apart. Those two could go back and forth, turn over the ball consistently, and find some value there. Jameis is, known for throwing multiple interceptions, could end up being in the favor of the Falcons. And of course, the Falcons, one of the better run-stopping defenses in the league. Very low-key, though. All right, those are my Week 11 waiver wire targets for this upcoming week. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, if you haven't yet already, subscribe to the channel. Help us get to 35K subs. Click the like button down below, comment down below. Make sure you click the Discord link down in the description of the video for those of you who are interested in joining our community Discord, having all things fantasy football related there. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Tomorrow we'll talk about running back rankings. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.